Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Huang Jingguo, and today my teammates Wen Guangyuan and Zhou Siyuan and I are going to talk about a massive blind spot in Southeast Asian urban planning. We are presenting a spatial policy framework titled Designing for the Overlooked. Let's dive right in. Take a look at this screen on the right. You see the promotional rendering for Singapore's Changi Terminal 4, air-conditioned boutiques, adult Caucasian passengers, and flawless aesthetics. Now, look at the left. This is the reality at the KL Central Basement bus station. 38-degree heat pooling, diesel fumes, and families sitting on bare concrete. Both terminals serve the exact same low-cost aviation network. But one was purposefully designed, while the other was simply left to happen. The author Max Hirsch calls this infrastructural fetishism, the tendency for planners to prioritize spectacular commercial spaces over the functional needs of actual users. But who exactly are these actual users? Thanks to ASEAN's Open Skies agreements, low-cost carriers now carry over 60% of all air passengers in Southeast Asia. This created what we call the Nouveau Global ACS migrant domestic workers, construction laborers, and budget tourists. They are mobile enough to fly across borders, yet marginalized enough to be completely failed by the ground infrastructure they arrive in. So why is this happening? We identified 3 structural failures: existing policies like IATA guidelines, national aviation regulations, and airport commercial mandates all say absolutely nothing about spatial form. Nobody is requiring bus interchanges to meet minimum ventilation standards. As a result, as you can see in this thermal heat map, temperatures routinely exceed safe limits for prolonged outdoor activity, leaving vulnerable passengers trapped in extreme heat. To fix this, we are proposing a 3-part framework where instruments reinforce each other across different scales. The Inclusive Ground Infrastructure Standards, IGs at the regional level, the Micro-Urban Terminal MILTS program at the neighborhood level, and a regional data protocol for enforcement. Let's start with IGIs. First, we establish a non-negotiable operational floor for all terminals. Because 35% of budget passengers lack bank cards, we mandate that at least 30% of ticketing counters must accept cash. We also mandate multilingual wayfinding that updates based on passenger demographics, a 20% buffer capacity for oversized luggage, and a guarantee of affordable public transport capped at 1% of the regional minimum wage. However, operational rules are useless if the physical space is hostile, and this is where landscape architecture steps in. Spatial form is not optional. IGEIs transform spatial design into a policy instrument. We mandate passive ventilation achieving 6 air changes per H-hour without mechanical cooling, driven by building orientation and stack effect roof geometry. For outdoor zones, we require 100% green shading, verified by a 5-degree drop in mean radiant temperature. Finally, 5% of the terminal must be dedicated to inclusive amenity zones, non-commercial public spaces with seating and free water. We cannot just regulate the airlines, we must regulate the space. To explain how we take this spatial framework out of the airport and into the city, I'll now pass the time to my colleague, Wan Guangyuan.
I'm Guangyuan, and I'll be taking you through how we extend this spatial framework into the city and how we force compliance when airports resist. Moving beyond the airport, how do we handle the journey into the city? Max Hirsch's fieldwork shows that informal transport networks, like the cross-Jian boundary buses in Shenzhen or AirAsia's Indian town centers, are not planning failures. They are highly rational responses to unmet demand. You cannot simply suppress them. The demand will just relocate. So, Our second policy is Parallel Network Registration, PNR, which formalizes these routes by licensing operators and providing subsidies on low-income corridors. But where exactly do these buses stop? To anchor this network, we introduced the Micro-Urban Terminal, or MUT. This isn't a massive new building, it's embedded directly into the existing urban fabric, like a shop house or mall ground floor. As landscape architects, we mandate specific spatial forms here. A 30% green facade for acoustic buffering and climate-responsive roof walls to guarantee cross-ventilation. We also mandate a strict pedestrian connection of under 500 meters to mass transit. Of course, we don't just trust operators to comply on paper. We measure success through hard data, tracking the drop in informal safety incidents and the rise in public transport mode share. Crucially, we enforce this using on-site pedestrian density counts and thermal imaging. To show you exactly how this enforcement works, in reality, let's dive into scenario, focusing on Kuala Lumpur's CLIA 2. Initially, the airport management resisted our inclusivity mandate. They gave us paper compliance by placing the required amenity zone in a dead, unair-conditioned corner of the terminal. When passengers avoided it, management claimed there was no real demand. But as our spatial retrofitting roadmap illustrates, data is the ultimate arbiter. During our audit, thermal maps proved the designated zone was actually a dangerous 35-degree heat island. Meanwhile, density maps showed migrant workers crowded in narrow corridors near the duty-free shops just to stay cool. Armed with this evidence, we issued a 90-day ultimatum tied directly to their operational license. This ultimatum forced a genuine physical redesign. The airport was compelled to dismantle commercial partitions that were blocking cross-gen ventilation. They reconfigured the roof for the stack effect, achieving little air changes per hour without mechanical cooling. On the western facade, we integrated vertical greening systems and photovoltaic canopies, reducing the mean radiant temperature by 3 to 5 degrees. The outcome is a departure from infrastructural fetishism toward a dignified space that recognizes its actual users as legitimate global citizens. But what happens when this policy faces resistance not from corporate airports, but from wealthy urban residents? I'll pass it to Zhou Siyuan to walk us through scenario.
So, we've seen how this policy works inside the airport. But what happens when we bring it into the heart of the city? In scenario B, we place a micro-urban terminal near a premium central business district. Almost immediately, we face resistance from wealthy residents citing noise and exhaust fumes. Meanwhile, bus operators engage in paper compliance, providing minimal shelter, which forces waiting passengers out onto the pavements. Drivers start using shadow routing via messaging apps, picking up passengers in hidden side streets. What we get is a chaotic flashpoint of selective enforcement and public altercations. How do we resolve this? Not by chasing passengers away, but by using landscape architecture as a tool for governance. Just like in the airport, we let the data speak. Thermal and density maps prove that the overcrowding is a design failure triggering strict enforcement. But the real solution is spatial. We introduce mandatory landscape buffering. Dense green screens and acoustic barriers are installed, not just for decoration, but to actively absorb diesel noise and lower temperatures. We use landscape design to physically mediate the conflict between luxury residents and budget transit users. This intervention leads us to a crossroads with two very different endings. In a managed success, the micro-terminal becomes a stable, predictable fixture in the streetscape. The green buffering works, resident opposition organically diminishes, and budget travelers get reliable airport access. But if political pressure forces the government to back down and scale back the terminal, we see a partial failure. The conflict might disappear from the premium district, but the demand doesn't. The gray market network simply resurfaces in more vulnerable, lower-income neighborhoods. making the system more covert and dangerous. Zooming out, what do both of these scenarios teach us? They show that non-compliance in infrastructure is structural. The conflicts we see, whether it's retail spaces in CLIA 2 or luxury apartments in the CBD, are fundamentally about who is recognized as a legitimate user of the city. In both cases, landscape tools like passive ventilation, green shading, and acoustic zoning act as vital political de-escalation tools. Ultimately, spatial form is never optional. The baseline conditions of our airports and transit hubs are the product of choices made for imagined elite users. But social outcomes cannot be separated from physical space. When we design for the nouveau globalis, the migrant workers, the budget tourists, the families, we are not just adding amenity. Design is a welfare question, and it deserves a concrete spatial policy answer. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope this framework helps us rethink how we build the Asian cities of tomorrow.